He didn't say it cruelly. That was the thing. He said it the way you'd note a weather forecast. Flat, informational, already moving on. She is adequate for what we need. Fragile, but manageable. I was standing 6 feet away. My pen kept moving across the clipboard. I finished the line I was writing, capped the pen, tucked it into my vest pocket the way I always do. I have spent my whole life being the woman who keeps moving, who finishes the line, who tucks the pen away and gets back to the work, because the work is the one thing that has never once looked through me like I wasn't there. The drive home that night took 40 minutes. I don't remember a single mile of it. If you have ever finished a sentence someone said about you, capped the pen, tucked it away, kept moving, this story is for you. Stay with me. There is a version of 2 a.m. that most people never meet. Not the 2 a.m. of insomnia or bad decisions or the specific dread that finds you in a dark bedroom. I mean the other kind. The one that belongs to people who chose it, who built something inside it, who learned that the world gets quieter and more honest once the day people go home and stop filling up all the air. My store smells like cold cardboard and the faint mineral bite of the walk-in cooler. The overhead fluorescents hum on the left side, louder than the right. I've known about it for 2 years and I keep forgetting to call anyone, and now it's just part of the sound of the place, like a heartbeat you stop noticing. I know every shelf by feel. I can tell a bad creative produce by the way it sits wrong on the palette, a half-inch lower than it should be, soft where it ought to hold. I built this from nothing. That is not self-pity or pride. It is just the fact of it. After the partnership dissolved and took my savings and 2 years of my life with it, I took what was left and I built something no one could dissolve. Something mine. The night I got the call from the court steward, I was relabeling inventory in the back. His name was Aldrich. He introduced himself twice. First his name, then his title, then the name of the court he represented, as if stacking credentials would make the request feel less like a transaction. His voice had the particular texture of a man who has spent a long time speaking to people he considered beneath him and has gotten very practiced at making that invisible. The court requires a reliable produce supplier for its kitchens and storehouse, he said. Weekly deliveries. Volume requirements are significant. I trust your operation can accommodate. It was not quite a question. It can, I said. The previous arrangement fell through due to reliability concerns. We would require assurance that. I don't miss deliveries, I said. Quotes on the table. Take it or don't. A pause. The kind that meant he was recalibrating. He took it. The first delivery was on a Thursday before dawn. I drove north out of Cheyenne on I-25 with the truck loaded and the heat up and the particular awareness I always carry into a new client space, that first walkthrough where you're reading a kitchen the way some people read a room, looking for what the layout tells you about how things actually run versus how someone intended them to. What the court's kitchen told me was this. Whoever designed it had been optimizing for appearance. Everything looked correct. The storage was arranged the way a photograph of a storage room would be arranged. Which meant the workflow was wrong, the rotation was wrong, and the cold side was losing product at a rate that would have made any supplier with a conscience adjust their order. I said nothing. I unloaded the crates where Aldrich directed me. I signed the delivery sheet. I walked back through the kitchen on my way out, slowly, the way I always do, not looking exactly, just letting things register. The shelving on the east wall had a gap. Cold air was pushing through it from the corridor every time the door swung, and whoever had been storing the root vegetables there had been doing it directly in that draft's path. A week into any delivery, half the bottom crate would be going soft before anyone opened it. I adjusted the next order. Rerouted the root vegetables to a different position in the packing. Added a note about placement that Aldrich would probably ignore, but the kitchen staff might read. It was not my job to do that. I did it anyway. That is the thing about confidence. It does not wait to be invited. He was there on the second delivery. I didn't know that until I turned around. He was standing near the far end of the kitchen corridor, silver-haired, still, wearing the kind of quiet that isn't peace but control. He was reading something. He did not look up when I came in. He looked up once, briefly, while I was speaking with Aldrich about the adjusted order. His eyes moved across me the way you'd scan a room, registering, categorizing, moving on. No pause. No acknowledgement that I had spoken. Aldrich said something about the previous supplier. Soren said, without looking at me. The usual arrangement was more punctual. Aldrich opened his mouth. The usual arrangement, I said, was losing product every week off the east shelving. I adjusted the placement. You're welcome. A silence. Soren looked up from what he was reading.
Not at me.
Past me, toward the east wall, as if verifying. Then back to the page. He said. He walked out. I drove home on I-25 with the windows down. February in Wyoming means the kind of cold that doesn't ask permission. It comes through glass and fabric and whatever you thought was protection, and it just sits there, factual and indifferent. I didn't mind it. I turned the radio up. There is a woman I have learned to be over the years, and she does not let things cost her what they want to cost her. She turns the radio up. She drives home. She makes a note in the delivery log, and she goes back to sleep for 3 hours before the store opens, and she does not let a man's indifference take up space in her that she needs for something else. I was very good at being that woman. I turned onto my street and sat in the driveway for a moment before going inside. The radio played through 2 full songs. I didn't hear either of them. What I kept thinking about, and this is the part one didn't say out loud, not even to myself, not really, was the kitchen. The gap in the shelving. The cold air coming through. The way no one had noticed and said nothing, or noticed and decided it wasn't worth the trouble. I had walked through once and fixed it. No one had asked me to. No one had thanked me. No one had done anything except look past me like I was part of the inventory. And I was going to go back next Thursday. I already knew that. The porch light was on. I got out of the truck and went inside. 3 months is long enough to know a place better than the people who live in it. I knew which corridor ran cold after midnight. I knew that the Tuesday delivery window was wrong, that the kitchen staff turned over at 6, and anything arriving after 5 meant the new shift was unloading without context, guessing at placement, doing it wrong. I knew that the vendor supplying dried goods to the court's secondary storehouse was skimming weight on every 4th pallet, had been for at least a year, and that no one had noticed because no one was checking against the original manifests. I rerouted that contract quietly, found a replacement out of Laramie, negotiated the rate myself, submitted the change to Aldrich as a scheduling adjustment. He signed it without reading it closely. The shortfalls stopped. No one mentioned it. I didn't expect them to. I want to be honest about that. I was not waiting for thanks. I have done enough work in enough rooms to know that the person who actually fixes something is rarely the person anyone thinks to credit.
You get used to it.
You build a kind of armor out of your own competence, and you tell yourself it is enough that the thing works. It is enough, I told myself. The thing works. That is enough. The morning Soren walked through the kitchen and noticed the improvement. I was 6 feet away with a clipboard. He stood at the center of the room, hands behind his back, that stillness he carries like a second skin, and he looked at the shelving, the rotation tags, the reorganized cold side layout. He did not ask how it happened. He turned to Aldrich. The operation has improved considerably, he said. Well managed. Aldrich started to say something. My lord, the credit belongs to. Soren had already moved toward the corridor. The sentence hung there, unfinished, addressed to a space he'd already left. My pen kept moving. I was marking arrival times against the manifest, a job that required exactly none of my attention, and I gave it all of my attention anyway. Line by line. The numbers were correct. I knew they were correct before I checked them. The pen left a small dent in the paper on the last line. I noticed it later, when I was filing the sheet. A small compression in the page, right at the bottom, the kind of mark that happens when you are pressing harder than you mean to. I filed it. I went back to work. Her name was Fun. She had been in the court's lower levels for decades. One of those people who becomes part of a place's infrastructure, who knows where everything actually is versus where it is supposed to be. She was not warm, exactly. She was precise. She spoke the way someone speaks when they have stopped wasting words on people who aren't listening. She found me in the loading corridor at the end of a Thursday delivery when everyone else had gone. I was rechecking a pallet I'd had a feeling about. The weight was off just slightly, and I'd learned a long time ago to trust that feeling. She stood at the end of the corridor for a moment. I wasn't sure she was going to say anything.
"We all know it's you," she said.
That was it. She turned and walked back toward the kitchen. I stood there with my hand on the pallet. The corridor smelled like cold stone and the particular damp of a space that never fully dries. The fluorescent strip above me buzzed at a frequency I could feel in my back teeth. I drove home holding those 4 words the way you carry something that might break if you grip it wrong. I didn't turn the radio on. I didn't need to fill the silence. I just let them sit in the cab of the truck with me on the long dark stretch of I-25 back toward Cheyenne, while the Laramie Range sat black against a blacker sky and the February cold pressed in through every seal.
"We all know it's you."
I kept my eyes on the road. I did not let myself do anything with that. Not yet. The re-engagement beat that changes everything happens on a Wednesday, 11 days later, at 10 minutes to midnight. I should have been gone by 9. The cold storage reconfiguration had been bothering me for 2 weeks. Not the layout I'd fixed in the first month, but a newer issue. The shelving on the north wall had developed the lean, barely perceptible, the kind of thing that announces itself only in aggregate. Weight distributed wrong across 3 shelves means the bottom crate gets compressed. Compressed produce at cold temperature goes without visible signs until it's already lost. By the weekend, if I left it, the loss would be significant. I stayed. I was 3/4 through the adjustment when I heard footsteps in the corridor. Not Aldrich's practiced efficiency, not Flynn's quiet precision. Something slower. Certain of itself the way only something very old can be certain, as if it has never once in its existence needed to hurry. He stopped at the entrance to the cold storage room. He did not come in. "Why are you still here?" His voice in the cold sounded different than it did in the main kitchen. Flatter. More direct. Like the marble had absorbed his usual control and left just the question itself. I didn't stop working. The north shelving is pulling left. 3 degrees off plumb. You'll lose the bottom crates of the stone fruit by Saturday. A silence. I heard him move, not toward me, toward the shelving. He looked at it the way he had looked at the kitchen that morning 3 months ago, taking inventory of a thing he had not previously seen. Then he looked at me. I kept my hands on the bracket I was adjusting. The metal was cold enough to sting. "You could have sent a note," he said. He walked out. The footsteps receded down the corridor. The cold storage room went quiet, that deep, specific quiet of a space that has been sealed against the world, where the only sound is the faint mechanical breath of the refrigeration unit cycling, and your own. I stood there with my hands still on the bracket. I breathed out slowly. A long breath, the kind that has been waiting for a room to itself. He had looked at the shelving, then at me. And the order of those 2 things, the shelving first, me second, told me exactly where I stood. I finished the adjustment. I collected my tools. I turned off the light in the cold storage room and walked out through the corridor and out to the truck and drove home in the dark. I was very good at this. I turned the radio up. I pressed too hard on the steering wheel the whole way home, and I didn't notice until I was pulling into my driveway and my hands were aching from the cold and the grip both, and I sat in the dark for a moment before I went inside. Worth acknowledging. The phrase moved through me once, quiet and uninvited, and I let it go. I know you're still here.
Good.
Don't go yet. What happens next is the part one almost didn't survive, and I need you to hear it. I started finding reasons to stay. That is the honest version of what happened in February, and I am going to say it plainly because I am tired of the other version. The one where I was simply thorough, simply professional, simply doing what the work required. I was staying longer than the work required. I was checking things twice that I had already checked. I was rerouting through the kitchen corridor on my way out when the loading exit was 20 feet closer. I did not examine this. There is a particular discipline in not examining things. I have practiced it for years. You build a wall around the question you don't want answered, and you get very busy, and you keep your hands moving, and you do not, under any circumstances, stand still long enough to hear what is on the other side of it. Cheyenne in deep February does not help. The sky goes white by noon, and the wind off the high plains has a quality that I can only describe as personal. It doesn't pass through you, it locates you, finds the specific gap between your collar and your jaw, and it stays there. The roads out of the city go flat and gray, and the Laramie Range disappears into cloud, and the whole world contracts to what is close and lit and warm. The court was lit and warm. I kept going back. I was not supposed to be there the afternoon of the gathering. I had finished the delivery by 2. I had a reason to stay, a legitimate one, a shelving issue in the secondary storehouse I had been meaning to address, and I was working through it quietly in the back corridor when I heard the advisors come in. There were 4 of them. I knew Aldrich's voice, and Fun had mentioned the others by name once. The tall one was Voss, council member, the kind of man who makes his intelligence felt like a hand on your shoulder, always slightly too heavy. They moved into the main room. I stayed where I was. There was no reason to announce myself. Their voices carried. The supply arrangement has stabilized, Aldrich was saying. I noticed, said Voss. His voice had a dry precision to it, the kind that carries a verdict before it announces one. You've let a night shift clerk reorganize your kitchen. The way he said night shift clerk, I want to describe it accurately. It was not contempt, exactly. It was something smaller and colder than contempt. It was the tone of a man identifying an object that has ended up in the wrong room. A pause. She is adequate for what we need, Soren said. Fragile, but manageable. My hands did not stop moving. I was checking a bracket on the lower shelf, 2 fingers under the lip, testing the stability. I kept testing it. I tested it 4 more times after it had already told me everything I needed to know. Fragile. Not incompetent. Not wrong. Fragile. The word he chose, and I turned it over in the silence of that back corridor with the cold coming up through the stone floor and the sound of the advisors moving on to the next item of business. The word he chose was the most efficient possible dismissal. Fragile means, she will break eventually. Fragile means, handle with necessary care and do not invest too much. Fragile means she is a temporary solution, not a real one, and whatever she has built here is incidental and owned by the people who gave her access to their space. I had reorganized his entire supply operation. I had fixed what 4 centuries of court management hadn't touched. Fragile. I finished the bracket. I gathered my tools. I walked out through the loading exit the short way this time, and I put everything in the truck and I drove. I did not turn the radio on. The road back to Cheyenne was the same road it always was, flat and gray, the white sky sitting low over the plains, the kind of landscape that does not soften for anyone. I drove at exactly the speed limit. My hands were correct on the wheel. I checked my mirrors at the right intervals. I was thinking about the first week I opened the store. I was thinking about standing in an empty building with a mop and a lease I couldn't quite afford, and the way my business partner's lawyer had explained, very carefully, why everything I'd built for 2 years was technically half his, and therefore negotiably all his, and therefore gone. I was thinking about how I had stood in that empty building and not cried, not because I was strong, not for any noble reason, but because I had simply moved past the part of me that cried about things like that a long time ago, and what was left was just the part that assessed the damage and started again. I thought about every room I'd walked into since then. Every client who had looked through me to the person beside me. Every conversation where I had been the one who solved the problem and someone else had been the one who received the thanks. I had always kept going. I had always told myself it was enough that the thing worked. I passed my store without stopping. That was new. I drove 2 blocks past it and turned around and came back and pulled into the lot and sat with the engine off. The fluorescent sign in the window flickered once. It does that in the cold. The connection in the left corner goes intermittent below 20 degrees, and I have known about it for 2 years, and I keep meaning to fix it, and I never do because it only matters when no one is watching. I sat in the dark of the truck cab, and I looked at the flickering sign, and I did something I have not done in a long time. I let the question out from behind the wall. What are you doing here? Not at the store. Not in the truck. At the court. What are you doing there, Renee? 3 months in, rerouting vendor contracts no one asked you to reroute, adjusting shelving at midnight, staying past 9 on a Wednesday because the work needed doing and you cannot leave a thing unfinished. What are you doing there? The sign flickered again. Held. Flickered.
I was not crying. I want to be clear about that.
What I was doing was harder than crying. I was sitting very still in a cold truck outside a store I had built from nothing, and I was letting myself understand, fully, finally, what I had been refusing to look at for 3 months. He had called me fragile in front of people who would never correct him. He was wrong. I was the least fragile thing in that entire court. And I was done proving it to someone who was never going to look up long enough to see it. I turned the key, started the engine, let it warm. I had a decision to make, and I already knew what it was. I just needed 1 more minute to be the woman who didn't. I sent the email on a Sunday morning. 11 sentences. Professional. I cited a scheduling conflict, true enough in the sense that I had decided my schedule no longer had room for a man who used the word fragile the way other people use the word fine. I recommended 2 vendors out of Casper, both reliable, both capable of handling the volume. I wished the court well. I closed the account in the billing system, filed the last manifests, and deleted the delivery reminder from my phone. Then I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table and watched the light come in through the east window, and I did not think about it. That is also not quite true. I thought about it the way you think about a tooth you've just had pulled, aware of the space, running your tongue over it, telling yourself the ache is just the body adjusting to an absence it will stop noticing by next week. I slept better that night than I had in 3 months. Real sleep, deep and uninterrupted, the kind where you wake up and the room is bright and you have no memory of where your mind went. I took that as information. The store was exactly as I had left it. The cooler hum, the smell of cold cardboard, the fluorescent strip on the left side buzzing slightly louder than the right. I fixed the connection in the sign the first week back, got a ladder, replaced the fitting in 20 minutes, stood in the parking lot in the February dark and watched it hold steady for the first time in 2 years. Small things. They accumulate. I restocked. I rerouted 2 of my own supply lines that I had let slide while I was giving all my optimization instincts to someone else's kitchen. I had 3 new inquiries from local restaurants by the end of the first week. My business had not suffered from the arrangement, but it had not grown either because I had been too busy quietly running a court-supplied chain to pursue anything new. I pursued things. I did not check my email for messages from Aldrich. I want to say that plainly because the honest version of this story requires it. I checked my email on the 4th day. Once. There was nothing. I closed the tab and went back to the inventory count. The store smelled right. The work felt right. My hands knew where everything was. I told myself, this is the life. This was always the life. You simply forgot for a while. I know what happened at the court, because Finn called me. She didn't explain herself. She just said, I thought you should know. And then she told me. The first vendor out of Casper was fine on volume but wrong on timing. They ran a day shift operation and the court's kitchen turned over at a window that didn't align, so the deliveries were arriving at the wrong hour and being handled by the wrong people. The cold storage protocols I had built into the system required someone who understood why they existed, not just that they did. Without that understanding, the protocols lasted about 10 days before the staff started shortcutting them. The formal dinner for the visiting delegation, Finn described it carefully. The particular silence that had fallen when the first course came out wrong. The way Soren had looked at the table with an expression she had never seen on him before, which was not anger, she said, but something slower and more troubling than anger. He had walked through the kitchen afterward. Alone.
Late.
He had stood in the loading corridor for a long time. I listened to all of this standing at my counter with the phone pressed to my ear and one hand flat on the surface in front of me. Very still.
Thank you, I said.
For telling me. I thought you should know, she said again and hung up. I stood there for a moment after. The cooler cycled on. The fluorescent hum picked up on the left side, that familiar slight variance, a sound I have stopped hearing except when the room goes quiet enough and I am still enough to notice it. I was not going back.
I was completely certain of that.
I had made the decision. The decision was clean and correct, and I had slept well every night since I made it, which was all the confirmation I needed. I moved my hand off the counter and went back to work. He called Aldrich in. I know this because Aldrich, in an act of what I can only describe as misguided transparency, sent me a brief, formal email 4 days after I left, asking if I would reconsider the scheduling conflict and whether there was a rate adjustment that might resolve it. I read it twice. I wrote back one sentence. The conflict is not schedule-related. I did not hear from Aldrich again. What I know of what happened next came to me in pieces from Fun over the following weeks. Soren had given Aldrich 2 days to find the answer to a single question. The answer Aldrich delivered, "Nothing changed, my lord. Someone left," had been met with a silence long enough that Aldrich had apparently not known whether to stay or go. He had stayed. Soren had dismissed him without another word. I did not know he came to my street until 3 weeks later, when my neighbor, a retired woman named Dorothea, who notices everything that moves within 2 blocks of her window, mentioned, with studied casualness, that a car had been parked outside my house on a Tuesday night. A nice car, she said.
Silver. Sat there for a while, she said.
Then left. I was carrying groceries in from the truck when she told me this. I set the bag down on the porch step. Tuesday night was the night I had stayed late at the store. The new lighting fixture in the back had needed adjusting, and I had lost track of time. I had come home after midnight to a dark house and a porch light I always leave on, gone inside, gone to sleep. He had been outside. He had not knocked. I picked up the grocery bag. I thanked Dorothea. I went inside and put everything away in the correct places, methodical and deliberate, and when I was done I stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the street. Quiet, ordinary, a Wednesday morning in Cheyenne, the sky low and white. He had come. He had sat outside my house in the dark, 20 feet from my door, and he had not knocked. I turned from the window. I did not know what to do with that. Not yet. So I did what I always do when something is too large for the moment. I put it behind the wall, and I went to open the store. My hands were completely steady. I noticed that too. The wall I had built around the knowledge of his car on my street held for approximately 6 days. Then it didn't. I wasn't thinking about it when it happened. I was in the middle of a routine inventory count. Tuesday night, the store quiet and mine, the cooler humming its familiar slightly uneven hum, and I was moving down the 3rd aisle with the clipboard when I stopped walking for no external reason at all, and just stood there between the shelving units with the pen in my hand, and let myself think it clearly, the way you finally look at a bruise you've been avoiding. He came. He sat outside my house in the dark. He did not knock because he was not ready. He left. And then he went back to his marble court, and he lived with whatever that felt like. I stood in the aisle for a moment. The cooler clicked through a cycle. The fluorescent buzz filled the silence the way it always does. Then I wrote the next number on the sheet and kept walking. I was not going to do anything with that information. I had made my decision, and it was the correct decision, and the fact that he had parked on my street changed nothing about the word fragile and everything it had meant when he said it. I kept walking. I was completely certain. He came on a Tuesday, 11 p.m., which means he waited until the day world was fully gone, until the street was dark and the store was the only lit window on the block. The door pushed open and the cold came in with him, that flat February cold that carries no smell, just temperature, and I looked up from the clipboard, and he was standing among my produce crates in a coat that cost more than my monthly lease, and he looked, I want to find the right word for it. Lost is too soft. Displaced is closer. He looked like a man who had made a decision that his body wasn't entirely sure about yet, standing very still the way he always does. But the stillness was different this time. Not control. Containment. I did not put down the clipboard. I came to apologize, he said. For which part? I said. He had not expected that. I watched him take it in. Watched the slight recalibration, The moment where he understood I meant the whole of it, not a specific incident, not a particular afternoon. All of it. The full 4 months of being assessed and discounted and worked around without acknowledgement. I meant all of it, and he knew it, and the silence that followed was the first honest thing that had ever passed between us. "For the way I spoke about you," he said, in front of the council. "That's one part," I said. Another silence. He was not accustomed to this. I could see it the way you see discomfort in someone who has spent centuries never needing to show it, the almost imperceptible tension in the line of his jaw, the way his hands, usually so still, made the smallest adjustment at his sides. He tried again. "You restructured an operation that 4 centuries of management had not improved." "I know," I said. "I was there." That landed. I saw it land. What came next was not smooth. He said something, formal, positioned, the language of a man who has negotiated for a very long time and defaults to it under pressure, and it had an edge to it that I recognized as fear wearing its best clothes. I called it directly. "That's not an apology," I said. "That's a contract clause." The silence after that one was long enough that I heard the cooler cycle off. Then on again. He looked at me. Not past me. Not through me. At me, with the particular attention of someone who has finally stopped managing a situation and started actually looking at it. "I need you to come back," he said. "I know," I said. "That's not the same as wanting me there." The stillness that followed was different from all the silences before it. Those had been his, the controlled quiet of a man waiting for the room to arrange itself around him. This one was something he did not manufacture. It arrived on its own. And in it, something in him came to the surface that I had not seen before, not the precision, not the authority, not the 4-century composure. Something underneath all of that. "I want you there," he said. Plain. No architecture around it. Just the sentence. Then, quieter, so quiet I almost misread it as something he hadn't meant to say aloud. I did not know what I had. The store was very still. The fluorescent hum. The cold coming off the shelving units. The smell of cardboard and the faint mineral bite of the walk-in. I looked at him for a long time. "I know that too," I said. He waited. I could see him waiting for the yes, for the terms, for whatever came next. I did not give it to him. "Come back in 3 days," I said. "Not because your kitchen is failing. Come back because you've thought about it, what you're actually asking for, and what it would cost you to mean it. If you still want to have that conversation, then I'll have it." He looked at me with an expression I had no previous context for. Not wounded. Not affronted. Something more careful than either. 3 days, he said. 3 days, I said. He left. The door swung shut behind him, and the cold he'd brought in dissipated slowly, and the store settled back into its own air, mine, familiar, exactly as I had built it. I locked the door. I stood with my back against it in the dark of the front room, the closed sign facing out, the lights off except for the back aisles still lit from the inventory count. My clipboard was still in my hand. I realized I had been holding it the entire time, had never once put it down, had gripped it like a railing at the edge of something high. I set it on the nearest shelf. 3 days was the right answer. I knew that. It was correct and careful, and it protected me from the version of the story where I say yes to a man before he has proven he means what he says. That was the correct answer. I stood in the dark of my own store, and I stopped arguing with myself about it, and I let the thing I had been pretending was not there come all the way to the surface, the wanting, plain and specific, not for the court or the contract or the problem-solving, but for him, for the way he had finally looked at me directly, for the I did not know what I had delivered quietly in a room full of cardboard crates like it cost him something real. I wanted him to come back in 3 days. I wanted him to mean it. I stood there and let that be true, and the cooler hummed, and the sign outside held steady. Both connections good, both lights burning, and I breathed out slowly in the dark of the place I had built from nothing. Worth acknowledging. The phrase moved through me, and this time I did not let it go. The 3 days were the longest I had spent inside my own head in years. Not because I was uncertain. The decision had been made in the dark of the store the night he left, standing against the locked door with the clipboard finally set down. I knew what I wanted. I had let myself know it, clearly, without the armor of practicality I usually keep between myself and anything I cannot afford to lose. The 3 days were long because knowing what you want when you are old enough to understand what wanting costs is not a simple thing to sit with. It is a weight, a specific, familiar weight, the kind you've carried before, the kind that has hurt you before, and you carry it anyway, eyes open, because the alternative is a life built entirely of things you were never willing to risk. I had lived that life. I knew its smell, cold cardboard and fluorescent hum, and the particular quiet of a woman who had stopped asking for things. I was done with it. He was there when I unlocked the front door at dusk on the 3rd day. No car. No Aldrich. No approach, no announcement. He was simply standing on the sidewalk outside my store in the February wind with his hands at his sides, silver-haired and still, wearing the cold the way someone wears something they stopped noticing a long time ago. He had not taken shelter in the doorway. He had waited in the open, in the wind, where I would see him from half a block away. I saw him from half a block away. I took my time with the lock. Key in turn, the familiar slight resistance of a mechanism that needs replacing and that I have been meaning to replace for a year. I pushed the door open. I stepped inside and left it open behind me, which was not an invitation, exactly. It was just the truth of the moment, that I was not going to make him stand in the wind any longer than he already had. He came in. The door swung shut. I went behind the counter, and I waited. I said it because it was easier, he said. No preamble. No positioning. He had been standing in the wind for, I didn't know how long, but long enough that the cold had worked its way into the fabric of his coat, and I could feel it from 3 feet away when he stepped closer.
Fragile, he said.
I used that word because it gave me distance from something I didn't want to examine. If you were fragile, you were manageable.
Temporary. Not worth, he stopped.
Started again. Not something I had to account for. My hands were flat on the counter. Still, I did not move them. You were not fragile, he said. You have never been fragile. I knew that within the first month. The word was a lie I told myself, and I told it in front of people who deserved to hear the truth, and you were standing there, and I.
He stopped again.
There was something in that stop that I had no name for, not performance, not calculation. The plain difficulty of a man hitting the edge of what his language can carry. 4 centuries of precise speech, and he had run out of the right words and was standing there holding the wrong ones, and he was not trying to recover. He was just standing there in the gap, letting me see it. I looked at him for a long time. That's the most honest thing you've ever said to me, I said. I know, he said. I have more.
He did.
He told me things that had nothing to do with the kitchen or the supply arrangements or the political calculations of his court. He told me what the loading corridor had looked like the night he went back and found it empty, clean, organized, the shelving exactly as I had left it, holding its plumb line in both directions, immovable. He told me he had stood there with his hand on the shelf for a long time, and that the specific quality of that stillness was something he had not encountered in himself in a very long while. He told me about sitting outside my house. He said it plainly, that he had known my address, had gone there, had sat in the car for 20 minutes. That he had not knocked because he had not yet earned the right to knock, and he had known it, and he had driven away because some part of him was still capable of recognizing the difference between what he wanted and what he deserved. And now, I said. Now I am here, he said. Asking. Not requiring. Not contracting. Asking. The store was very quiet. The cooler hummed. The sign outside held its light steady, both connections good, both burning. I stepped out from behind the counter. I am not going to tell you it was simple after that. It wasn't. 2 people learning to occupy the same space honestly is not a smooth process. It is a daily negotiation, A continuous choice, the kind of work that does not announce itself as work because it looks from the outside like just living. He learned to name things before their absence forced his hand. That was the change I watched happen in him, slowly over the months that followed, the shift from a man who recognized value in retrospect to one who said it while it was still present, still whole. I learned to let myself be held by something larger than what I'd built alone. That was harder. I had been self-sufficient for so long that receiving, not help, not assistance, but genuine regard, the kind that doesn't require you to earn it fresh every day, felt like standing on ground that shouldn't be able to hold my weight. I kept testing it. He let me test it. He didn't take it personally when I pulled back, and he didn't push when I needed the distance, and over time the ground proved itself, and I stopped testing and started standing. Our marriage was not a ceremony of sentiment. It was a document signed by two people who had looked at the full cost of the thing and chosen it anyway, eyes open, no illusions. The child we brought into the world, our daughter, the first of what she is, human and vampire in equal measure, changed every political calculation across every court on the continent. She was proof of a thing that had been declared impossible. She arrived in the world already rewriting it. I think about that sometimes. There's a moment I return to, a morning, early before the court staff arrived. I was in the kitchen alone, my kitchen now, in the sense that matters, standing at the east wall with my hand on the shelving I had reorganized in the dark, months before anyone knew my name, months before anyone thought to ask what was holding things together. The shelf was solid, exactly plumb. The work I had done at midnight for a man who called me fragile, in a room where no one was watching, it was still there. It had held everything. It was still holding. I stood there in the quiet kitchen, and I let that land. Not triumph. Something underneath triumph, something older and more specific. The particular satisfaction of a woman who did the work when no one was watching and lived long enough to stand in what it built. Worth acknowledging. The phrase came through me one last time. And this time, finally, I understood it had always been meant for me, not a request directed outward, but a truth I had been carrying without claiming. I was worth acknowledging. I always had been. I took my hand off the shelf and went to start the day. If something in this story touched something you thought you'd put away, you are not alone. There are other women in this world who understand what it is to be called fragile by someone who needed them to survive. Their stories are here. Subscribe and stay. This is where we come when we need to remember what we're worth. There are women in this city who came into power the same way I did, sideways, through a door no one thought to guard. Not all of them got what I got. Some of them are still standing in those loading corridors in the cold, doing the work, waiting to be seen. I think about them. I don't know their names, but I recognize the way they hold a clipboard.